I never believed in ghosts. I never believed in the supernatural. But I do believe in this. When you hear a sound that no one else can hear, every night at the same time, behind walls you thought were solid, you begin to question everything you once held real. This happened to me. It started small, almost unnoticeable, a faint hissing, like steam escaping through a tiny crack. But over weeks, it grew in my mind until I could no longer tell if I was going mad, or if something in my house was trying to tell me its story. In early March of 2023, I relocated across the country to Lakewood, New Hampshire, taking a job as the archivist for the town's historical society. My apartment was on the second floor of an old Victorian building on Maple Street, 3 stories, painted fading cream with ivy clutching the facade. Upstairs lived a reclusive artist who I never saw but would smell faint turpentine oil at odd hours. Below me was Mrs. Golding, a kindly widow whose cat lashed the rails at 6 a.m. Every morning, I like my new place. Hardwood floors, crown molding, a claw-footed bathtub, and best of all, antiquated plumbing. Every turn of the faucet sounded hearty. Every creak of a joint had history. Inside those walls, I felt like I'd stepped back in time. That first week was busy, sorting century-old diaries, cataloging photographs of early settlers, mastering the labyrinthine filing system. I barely noticed how tired I felt when I finally collapsed in bed at 11 p.m. until the pipe spoke to me. On the third night, as I drifted halfway into sleep, I heard it, faint, a soft, wet hiss. Not from the radiator, that was silent. Not from outside the window, no wind, no traffic. It came from inside the wall, behind my headboard. I lay rigid, eyes wide in the dark, not daring to move. The hissing ebbed, then rose again. Too measured to be a rat, too whispered to be a door creak. It sounded deliberate, like a breath held too long, then released in a whisper. My heart pounded. I switched on the lamp. The narrow beam cut through wallpaper, striped cream, and gold. I pressed my ear to the wall. The hissing stopped. I circled my hand over the surface. Nothing. No drafts, no bulges, no cracks. Even the paint felt uniform. I backed away. Still, sleep was impossible. I huddled under the covers until dawn, a dozen times bolting upright at the merest glimmer of sound. By day, I reminded myself, old pipes, shifting pressure, trapped air. It had to be that. Steam heating systems often hiss when valves cracked, I told myself. But my building's original steam radiators had been replaced decades ago. These were water lines, modern PX tucked behind plaster. I inspected every fixture. The kitchen sink, the bathroom tap, the laundry room down the hall. Nothing. No leaks. No pings. The maintenance man, Jack, crawled behind a laundry dryer and shook his head. He ran his hand along copper pipes, cool, silent. "Not much up here, Miss Hawthorne," he said. "You might have heard your imagination." His half-laugh stung. I forced a smile. The second week, I noticed when the hiss occurred. Exactly 2:23 a.m. every night. Always 3 minutes after I'd fallen asleep, no matter how late I'd gone to bed. If I read until 1 a.m. or napped in the afternoon, at 2:23 a.m. sharp, ephesus, a slow, dragging hiss that faded in 60 seconds flat. I started keeping a log. March 8th, 2:23 a.m., hiss 62 seconds. March 9th, 2:23 a.m., hiss 61 seconds. March 10th, 2:23 a.m., Hiss, 63 seconds, accompanied by a faint tap-tap under the floor. That last one rattled me. Tap-tap, tap-tap, repeated twice like fingernails drumming inside the joist. I scoured the ceiling beneath my bedroom with a mirror and flashlight. Nothing. No loose floorboard. No rustle of mice. No hollow spots. The building's contractor confirmed the subfloor was solid oak. 2 nights later, I knocked on the door of 3B, the apartment above. The smell of linseed oil hit me before the door opened. Thick, sweet, unmistakable paint thinner. I explained the hiss. She frowned. I haven't heard a thing, she said. Unless it's a cat's. I have 3. She introduced herself as Simone, a painter who worked nights. She said the apartment was supposedly soundproofed, but that test had been inconclusive. She shrugged and closed the door. I shouldn't have believed her. If pipes hiss every night exactly at 2:23 a.m., why would only I hear them? Other neighbors slept through. Had they noticed? Or had they simply learned to ignore? On night 10, the hiss ended differently. At 2:23 a.m., FSSSSS. And then, a faint whisper, as if someone were pressing their lips against the plaster and uttering my name. I jolted upright, clear as a penny. Eleanor. I bolted into the hall and turned on every light. My phone was by the bed. I dialed 911, but hung up when they answered, couldn't bring myself to explain ghost whispering through pipes. I told myself it had been my name echoing off the hallway tile, misheard, a trick of acoustics. Determined, I set up 2 devices, a voice-activated recorder under the bed, a motion camera in the corner, aimed at the far wall and the headboard. If it was mechanical, at least I could show proof. If it was something else, maybe the recordings would catch it. March 18th, the night the recorder and camera both tripped. In the morning, I played back the audio. 2:22 and 57 seconds a.m. silence. 2:23 and 1 second a.m. hiss. 2:23 and 45 seconds a.m. tap. Tap. The camera's footage was grainy, dark with infrared glow, but clear enough. The wall behind the headboard shimmered, as if the drywall breathed outward. A dark shape flickered, no more than an indistinct smear. Then the hiss and the name. I stared at the playback, pulse racing. I watched over and over. I withdrew into my small dining room. Lights dim, phone and recorder at hand. In a box of old estate sale books, I found a battered leather journal stamped H, presumably an earlier tenant from the 1930s. Its brittle pages described the same phenomenon. This night the pipes screamed a name. Not mine. I scratched at my door with a file, my only defense. But at dawn, the scratches were gone. So were my dreams. Every entry ended the same. Scratched out sentences, lists of times, and eventually just a single word on stained pages. Listen. I realized with dawning horror that the sounds were coming from the walls, not the plumbing. The pipes were just conduits. The house itself, its plaster and lath, breathed and whispered. That night, I taped every vent closed, sealed every crack with duct tape, and pressed towels along the baseboards. I turned on every fan, every white noise machine. I didn't sleep. I waited. At exactly 2:23 a.m., the house spoke, FSSS like steam rumble, like wind in a tunnel. Eleanor. Clear, urgent, listen. Stay, fragmented thump, 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 a heartbeat deep beneath the flooring then, nothing until dawn. I woke with a pounding heart and bruises on my ankles, as if something had gripped me in the dark. I scratched at them until it bled. I kept the blood in a jar. Over the next week, the schedule expanded. The hiss returned at 2:05 a.m., then 4:44 a.m., always. 3 events, always inexact whispers, always the same name, my name. Each time preceded by tap. Tap on the walls like fingernails tracing invisible patterns. I mapped it. The pattern made no sense. Not machine code, not Morse, but it felt purposeful, like a message being spelled out letter by letter, waiting for me to decode it. My days became nightmares. I stumbled through town in a daze, books clutched to my chest, head bent, listening. I visited the Historical Society library and found building plans, no secret passages, no hidden ducts, just standard plaster over wood. No cavities large enough for a person or animal. But that journal from the 1930s said the same. And tenants from the 60s and 70s spoke of voices and scratches in the walls. I thought I was the only one crazy enough to record it on tape. But the patterns, the voices, the times, they all matched the old entries in that weathered journal. The worst night came when the hissing stopped. I'd grown numb to it, until at 2:23 a.m., silence reigned. My recorder sat silent. The house held its breath. And then, at 2:23 exactly, a different sound. A gurgle like water boiling in the walls, then a baby's cry. Piercing, desperate, days old, newborn. I bolted up, mind reeling, and tore open the wall between the bedroom and the hall. Under the plaster, new laugh. Fresh, not 70 years old like the rest. I tore it away and found a single curled object. A fetus preserved in a jar tucked into a cavity. No labels, no fluid, only soot and dust. I nearly fainted. I dropped it. Glass cracked. The room filled with the sound of hissing, louder than ever. I don't know how I lived that night. I wrapped myself in blankets, lights blazing, and lay on the living room floor. The house groaned. The pipes rattled. The walls whispered my name and screamed in anguish. I vomited bile and tears. I begged it to stop, but it didn't. I arrived at the Lakewood Historical Society the next morning bleary-eyed and shaken. My notes from the previous night, detailed logs of every hiss, every whisper, every heartbeat-like thump, lay spilled across my desk. I had to find context, something that explained why the pipes spoke my name and why a century-old journal described identical phenomena. In the musty reading room, I began poring over. Building Permit City Council Minutes newspaper clippings. One article stood out. A 1942 letter to a theater from a Mrs. Laura Whitcomb, complaining that the pipes hiss at night, whispering lost secrets. She ended her letter mid-sentence. No follow-up. I tracked down a death notice for Laura Whitcomb. She had died 2 months after writing that letter, of unknown causes, aged 53. No obituary explained the sudden illness. No mention of the hissing. Her home, Maple Street number 12, had been torn down decades ago, replaced by the current Victorian row where I lived at number 14. As I studied old maps, a chilling pattern emerged. Every few years, the house next door changed occupants after a sudden death or disappearance. None of those replacements lasted more than 2 years. The building itself seemed cursed, its walls absorbing grief and releasing it through water and iron. That evening, I had descended into the basement for the first time. I'd avoided it, hoping the hiss lived solely in the bedroom and kitchen walls. Dim incandescent bulbs revealed concrete floors, exposed brick walls, and a tangle of pipes. The hiss was deafening here, but it shifted pitch as if multiple voices overlapped. I traced the main trunk line, the largest pipe, abandoned, thick with corrosion. Rust streaked down its length. Beneath it, hidden behind a loose cinder block, I found a small steel hatch. Rusted shut, but not locked. With a screwdriver, I pried it open. Behind the hatch lay a cavity, a crawl space just large enough for a child. Inside, a single handwritten note scrawled on a scrap of ledger paper. Do not listen. Do not reply. Do not enter the wall. No signature. No date. Over the next week, the nocturnal hisses grew articulate. At first, a single word per night. Listen. Return. Follow. Then, full phrases. Find a red ledger. She waits behind the blue tile. The pipes taste blood. And finally, I demand, come to the basement. I recorded everything, my voice trembling as I repeated each phrase into the morning's transcript. Acting on the command, I returned to the archives and hunted for something never before cataloged. The red ledger. It wasn't in the main stacks. It wasn't listed in any finding aid. After 2 days of fruitless searching, I noticed a dusty filing cabinet marked Municipal Works, 1897. Inside, behind moldy blueprints, lay a slim red-bound book. Its pages were brittle and water-stained, but legible. It documented every repair call on the neighborhood's water and steam lines from 1897 to 1922. At several entries, the comments read, 11/12/1903, reported hissing beneath floorboards. No leak found. Resident heard crying. Reopened in the night. Found no source. 2/8/1912, pipe spoke name of occupant, then snapped shut. Doctor called. 7/29/1920, new brick installed around living room, flue to dampen sound. Hissing persisted. Between the lines, scrawled in red ink, were warnings. He hears you. He calls you. One whisper told me to seek behind the blue tile. Maple Street homes had a shared design. A small bathroom lined in pale blue ceramic tile, an expensive choice in 1901. That tile was original to my apartment's in soot. As I removed a piece near the tub, I found a keyhole carved into the mortar, not visible until the tile shifted. Inside the hollow, I retrieved a small iron key coated in grime. It fit a lock in the basement crawl space hatch I had pried open days earlier. That night, with the key in hand, I descended into the basement again. I unlocked the steel hatch and slipped into the narrow crawl space. My flashlight beam wavered over bare brick and tangled piping. The air was rancid, like wet wool and mildew. I followed the pipes until I reached the point where the main trunk dipped beneath the floor. There, a second hatch, smaller, circular, forged iron. The key fit perfectly. Behind this hatch was another chamber, tiny, perhaps 3 feet across, carved not of brick but of rough-hewn limestone. In its center lay a small wooden box, stained dark and sealed with iron bands. A tattered label read, Property of Maynard Fitch, 1906. Private. My blood ran cold. Fitch was the contractor who built this entire block. Rumor said he vanished without a trace in 1907. I hauled the box into the basement, pried it open, and found its contents cocooned in oak shavings. A child's leather shoe, size toddler. A porcelain doll head crackled and haunted, eyes gouged. A single bone, phalanx, human. The hiss erupted, deafening. Pipes rattled. Walls groaned. In the whirlwind of sound, I heard cries, like a child calling for help, though words were impossible to decipher. I bolted up and out of the crawl space, slamming both hatches behind me. That night, I did not sleep. Instead, I sat in the basement light, clutching the doll head and bone, listening to the pipes shout and whisper. At exactly 2:23 a.m., the hush broke. You found us. He demands a trade. My hand shook. The porcelain head slipped from my grasp and shattered, revealing behind it a folded scrap of red ledger paper. On it, one life for one secret. Above the words, in tiny script, Maynard Fitch paid in full. I realized then, the house remembers. It keeps ledger. It collects debts. And the pipes. They're the auditors. The nights no longer held any separation from the day for me. I would sit in silence, not daring to close my eyes, as the hissing pulsed around me, not from within the walls anymore, but from the floor, from the ceiling, from the air itself, like steam leaking directly into my skull. And always, always, just before the sun touched the sky, it would begin speaking again, never louder than a whisper, yet always fell directly behind my right ear, always. Cold, always with breath that reeked of wet iron UOU. No UO was what it whispered now a dozen times, each night a child's voice sometimes, or the dry throat rasp of an elderly man, then the slick high voice of a woman, half humming, half weeping, each one different, each one speaking the same thing over and over like a lullaby built to drain sanity. Instead of bring rest, I stopped returning to the historical society. I stopped talking to the neighbors. I stopped answering phone calls. Food tasted like dust and water made. My stomach churned. I was hollow. I was disappearing, and the building wanted me to accept it by the sixth night. I realized I was being watched, not in the way one says out of paranoia, but truly watched. The plumbing no longer felt like part of the infrastructure. It felt like eyes the hiss would pause when I walked, then resume only after I sat down, or turn away. The old red ledger haunted me. I had photocopied only 4 pages before returning it, and now it was missing from the archives completely. I begged the clerk to help me find it, and he looked at me like I was insane, told me no such book had ever existed in their catalog. No record, no accession number, no reference. And yet I could feel its weight in my hands still sometimes when I closed my eyes, and smelled mold and rust. I thought I could hear it whispering too, as if even the pages were part of this monstrous arrangement. The crawl space door stayed locked now. Though I had the key, it resisted me like something inside had swollen and warped the wood and stone. And when I pressed my ear to it, I could hear not hissing, not speech, but breathing slow, enormous, and wet like lungs, stretched through miles of pipework coiled beneath the earth or the floor, or maybe even beneath my skin. On the 7th night, I woke up not in my bed, but on the floor of the kitchen. The lights off the window cracked open. A draft moaning across the counter in my hand was a brass pipe wrench I had never seen before, and at my feet was a smear of something dark and wet that led back toward the basement. I followed it down in bare feet, the steps icy, each groan of wood echoing like thunder. The trail stopped at the base of the old boiler, which had been shut off for decades, rusted shut and useless, or so I thought, until I saw the panel ajar, just wide enough for a slip of paper. It was another note, identical in hand to the one I had found in the crawl space, though written this time on the back of what appeared to be a ration. Slip dated October 1918, it read, "She drowned, she." Wouldn't stop screaming. She screamed through the pipes. Now she sings. I didn't sleep after that night. I didn't try. The pipes began vibrating constantly, and the hissing became full voices, saying phrases I recognized from old texts, from that red ledger, from Mrs. Wickham's letter to the editor, and from my own dreams, which were no longer dreams, but corridors where the air breathed, and the walls pulsed, and the floor gurgled like throatless laughter. I tried calling the building inspector again. Same one who had dismissed my complaints a month ago this time. He didn't answer. His voicemail was full, and when I searched his name online, all records of his employment had vanished. Only one article remained, a 3-line story about a missing man last seen entering a Maple Street address for a noise complaint. That address was mine. The pressure inside the apartment increased with each passing night, like the walls were inhaling me, drawing me inward. I boarded up the bathroom. I locked the bedroom and moved everything I owned into the living room. The pipes were always louder, and they're louder and more specific. They began repeating my name, Eleanor, Eleanor, over and over, then pausing before whispering the word debt or payment. Or below. Then came the night of the flood at exactly 218 in the morning. The sound began like a scream forced through a straw rising from the kitchen vent. And the moment I stood up to check it, a gout of black water exploded from beneath the sink, drenching the walls and pooling around my ankles, thick, warm water smelling of rot and metal. It was not just water. Inside were scraps of newspaper photos, pieces of doll limbs and lawn, strands of black hair that tangled around my toes and pulled. I screamed and ran, but the water followed, rising up through vents, faucets, even through cracks in hardwood floor, until every pipe in the house howled in unison. A single name, not mine, not any name I recognized, but something old and inhuman, syllables that cracked the air and made the lights burst. The voice then said clearly, now there must be balance. You found the secret. You broke the seal. Now there must be balance. And I understood. The house wanted a trade. It always had. It kept its ledgers and whispers and valves and rust stains. And it knew I had taken from it knowledge, secrets, memories. It considered sacred and sealed. And for that I owed one life, for one secret I could give it. Nothing else. And so I began watching the neighbors. I began watching them not because I wanted to, but because something inside me had shifted, as if the house had found a valve in my mind and turned it slowly, letting something in, not water, not air, something colder, something older. I stood by the window every night, just as the hissing began, and watched their lights go out one by one. I knew their patterns. The man 2 floors up who always took a shower at midnight. The woman across the hall who fed her cat by the window. The elderly couple downstairs who left their radio on all night long, tuned to static. It wasn't just sounds anymore, it was dreams. Now, too, I started dreaming in water rooms, submerged, black pipes overhead like ribs, and somewhere beyond the murk something swimming. Something vast, something headless with arms too long and too many eyes or mouths, or something worse. When I woke, my clothes were damp and the hissing would be loudest. Just as my eyes opened, like it had been waiting for me to hear it, the wrench appeared again, this time on the bathroom sink. Without explanation, its metal slick with condensation. And when I picked it up, I swear I heard something sigh, like the house was relieved, like it believed I was about to do what it wanted. The worst part was I started to believe I should. I told myself it was the influence of the place, that the air was poisoned, or the plumbing carried something ancient like mold, but deeper, worse, like the memory of a curse etched into the copper walls themselves. And every time I tried to leave the building, something would happen. My phone would go dead, my vision would blur, or a car would screech and nearly hit me, and I would stumble back inside, gasping for breath, like I was only safe inside. And the moment I left, I was marked for death. Or maybe it wasn't that I was unsafe outside. Maybe it was that I belonged to the building now. One night, the hissing formed words again, louder, clearer than ever. I could hear them in every faucet, in every drain in the goddamn toilet, saying, "She is ready, she accepts, she will deliver, she will deliver, she will deliver," over and over until the walls trembled and the fire alarms began to shriek and then stop all at once in perfect silence that felt thicker than the noise had that night. The girl upstairs screamed. I ran before I could stop myself, heart pounding, feet bare, wrench in hand. I ran up 3 flights and found the door already open, the hallway soaked with a thin trickle of black water that smelled like rot and iron and old blood, and she stood there in the center of the living room, soaked hair hanging down around her face, eyes wide and blind, as if she was looking through a window I couldn't see, and the air around her shimmered with heat that wasn't real, and cold that was behind her. The wall was bulging, the paint bubbled and cracked, and behind it something throbbed like muscle or lung, and the pipes were pushing out slowly like veins, like metal fingers try to reach her. And she didn't move, didn't scream anymore, just stood there and whispered, "He's here, he's here, he's here." I stepped toward her, not knowing why, not knowing what I was doing, not until I was a foot away, and the wrench in my hand began to hum, to vibrate, and then burn cold, and I understood then that I could stop it, that I could end her, and the house would take her and leave me alone, or at least quieter. But I didn't. I dropped the wrench. It hit the floor with a clang like a bell being struck underwater, and the bulging wall side deflated slightly, and the girl collapsed at my feet, eyes rolling back, blood leaking from her ears. She lived, but she was never right again. She left the building the next morning and never came back, and the hissing got louder. It was angry now. Angry and desperate, like steam pressed too tight inside thin old pipes. And it began screaming, not with words, but with shrieks that only I could hear. I plugged every faucet, I stuffed every drain with towels, but it came anyway, through the walls, through the light fixtures, through my own pores. It felt like I started bleeding from my gums. My teeth began to loosen. Every time I turned my head too fast, I could see something tall and narrow reflected in mirrors standing too close behind me, a shape like a man, made of pipes or shadows or water pressure, sometimes upside down, sometimes backwards. I found another note, this time in the fridge behind a jar of pickles, in handwriting I recognized as my own, though I had never written it. It said, "The debt remains, stop resisting, or the building will balance itself." That night, all the neighbors' lights went out at once, and the hissing paused long enough for me to hear something crawling through the vents, something wet and metallic and large. I locked every door and hid under the bed and prayed not to God, but to the copper God, to the rust God, to the pipe God I didn't believe in and never had, until the walls breathed and the floor moaned and the water in the toilet turned black and began to ripple with something trying to surface. The girl's cat showed up on my doorstep, soaked and shivering, with a tiny wrench embedded in its side. The building had decided if I would not deliver, it would choose for me, and that terrified me more than anything else, because I knew now that it could. And I knew now that I would. There is a point where horror becomes something else, not fear, not madness, but a kind of numb clarity, a quiet space inside your skull where your mind stops trying to make sense of what is happening and simply begins to obey, to endure, to process as best it can. I reached that point the night I woke up to the sound of whispering, not coming from the pipes this time, but from inside my mouth. My jaw hung open, not from sleep, but from something else, something that had entered while I was unconscious. I could feel the words vibrating against my teeth, a low murmuring that tasted like blood and mold, and every word felt like it was not meant to be spoken by human lips. When I ran to the mirror, I saw it in my reflection, my mouth still moving slowly, deliberately, but not in sync with what I felt inside, like something was rehearsing through me. And for a moment, my eyes didn't blink. When I blinked, I vomited on the floor, a black, watery mess that slithered down into the floorboards and was gone before I could even grab a towel. The hissing returned that same moment, not just from the walls anymore, but from every object in the apartment. The radiator, the electrical outlets, even the bulbs flickered with static whispers. And that was when I saw the shape again, standing in the hallway, no longer hiding. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head bent at the ceiling, its limbs stretched and wrong, its joints turned backward or sideways, or both its arms so long they drag along the floor, and its skin was slick like metal wrapped in grease or oil. But it wasn't metal, it was old copper etched with something like scripture too eroded to read, and where its face should be, there was only a single open valve, dripping water that hissed as it hit the floor. It did not speak aloud, but I heard it inside me, like steam in my skull pressing against every memory I had, and then replacing them one by one with names. I did not know, stories. I had never lived in locations that no longer existed. The debt remains, it said again, and this time it was not a request. It was a judgment. The next 3 days were a blur, not because I was unconscious, but because time itself no longer obeyed anything sane. Sometimes the clocks moved backward, sometimes they stopped entirely. Sometimes I would blink, and it would be morning again. Food rotted in my hands before I could eat it. Water from the faucet came out thick and black or boiling hot. Even when turned to cold, I heard footsteps above me constantly. Even though the upstairs apartment had been vacant for weeks, I checked the door once and found it sealed with rust like it had been welded shut from the inside. And when I placed my ear to it, I heard scratching. Then I saw the child. She was sitting in the center of my living room, staring at nothing, her eyes milky and filmed over, her hands placed neatly in her lap, and every few seconds she would tilt her head and mouth something silently, and behind her the shadows on the wall would twitch, as if mirroring her, but slower, delayed, like a bad signal. I asked her who she was, and she said something I will never forget. I was the one before you. Then she vanished, just blinked out of existence. And where she had sat, the floorboards were soaked, and warping. A pipe had pushed through the wood slightly, just enough to gleam in the light, and hiss a single word into the air. Soon I realized. Then the building had a cycle marked. Someone it waited, it whispered, and if the person resisted, it began to break them down piece by piece, not violently, but patiently, the way water carves stone, the way time erases names from gravestones, until all that remained was the shape of a person who would do what was asked. I didn't want to become that shape, but I already was. I knew what it wanted. It had shown me again and again. Someone had to be given to it, not killed, not sacrificed, in a ritualistic way, but delivered like a sealed pipe, passed along like pressure released through a valve. And I understood now why the girl upstairs had been chosen and why I had been spared, because I had hesitated, because I had not completed the transaction. It wasn't rage it felt toward me. It was disappointment. The cat disappeared from my doorstep the next night. Only a smear of hair and a blood-stained pipe remained coiled on my welcome mat like a message. And then came the message in my handwriting left on my pillow. There must be a balance, one death, one silence, one inheritance. Give her to us, and the pipes will rest. The note was stained with black water and something sticky that smelled like rot. And when I flipped it over, there was a single name written on the back, Susan. That was my neighbor, the older woman 2 floors down, who had once brought me a casserole and told me the history of the building, the one who always left her radio on, the one who sometimes sang old hymns late into the night like she was trying to drown out something only she could hear. I found her that morning asleep in her recliner, pale, thin, her lips cracked, her eyes moving rapidly under their lids, and the radiator next to her hissed constantly sound that shifted as I entered the room, almost like relief, almost like pleasure, and I knew then that she had known all along that she had passed the debt to someone else, and the pipes had accepted it, and now she was empty. I left without a word, without touching anything, and the hissing followed me home, not angry anymore, but soft, satisfied, content. I slept for the first time in days, but the dream I had was worse than all the waking hours combined. I stood in the basement that did not exist, the one beneath the building that no one could access, where the foundation was cracked open like a wound, and inside it were valves and gears and pulsing organs wrapped in copper, and from the walls hung hundreds of bodies suspended by pipes drilled through. Their spines and mouths, all of them still, breathing faintly, and each one stared at me. As I passed, one opened its eyes and whispered, "You're next." I woke to the sound of someone knocking at my door, and behind the door, the hissing was breathing. There was a moment that night where everything stopped, not just the hissing or the whispers or the ticking of clocks, but the air itself, as though time had been vacuumed out of the room, and I stood there holding the door handle frozen. The knocking had stopped, but the presence behind the door had not. It was still there waiting, not asking this time, simply waiting. I don't know how long I stood there before I opened it. The hallway was empty at first, or it appeared that way, until I looked down and saw the trail water black and streaked, with rust leading from my door to the stairwell, and it was warm, still, steaming like fresh blood. I followed, of course. I didn't want to, but I did, because by now I wasn't guiding myself anymore. Something else had taken hold, some sliver of my will that the building had twisted into obedience. It led me down to the basement. No, the sub-basement, the one I was told didn't exist, the one with the door I had passed 100 times and never noticed until now, because now it was open and inside was a stairwell that curved downward, too long, too deep, made of brick and pipe and heat. I went down one step, then another, and with each one the sound of the hissing grew clearer, more articulate, forming words I almost recognized, not in English, not in any language I'd learned, but in something older, raw, something that spoke to the marrow. It welcomed me. There were no lights, but I could see everything somehow. The walls pulsed, the air shimmered with moisture and hanging. From the ceiling were wires, not electrical ones, but thin copper veins that twitched like nerves. Each step forward made the pipes groan and flex around me, the entire place alive and aware. And watching at the bottom was a chamber. It wasn't large, but it felt endless in the way dreams do when logic has unraveled. And standing in the center was the shape I had glimpsed in mirrors and shadows, now fully visible, a man of pipes, not wrapped in pipes, but made of them, constructed from elbows and valves and tubes, all blackened and stained with time, his limbs segmented like insect legs, his spine a lattice of rusted coils, his face featureless, except for a wide open drain in the center where his mouth should be, and he made no sound with it, but I could hear him inside my skull. The debt must be paid. I asked, why me, why anyone? And the answer came not in words, but in memory, sudden, impossible memory of others who had stood where I stood, of generations of tenants, all broken by the hissing, by the dreams, by the building itself, which had always been more than brick and metal, more than architecture. The building was a container, and the pipes were its veins, and the hissing was its breath, and what it needed was balance. It had been built atop something not cursed, but aware. Something ancient, something buried, not dead, but dreaming, and the structure had been its shell, its anchor, its means of feeding, and to feed it required sacrifice, not blood, not flesh, but the moment of decision the precise flicker of will. When someone chooses to give another to it, that choice is what it feeds on the fracture, the surrender, the moment one soul damns another. And now it was my turn. Susan had chosen me, and I had failed to choose the girl upstairs. So it had waited now. It would not wait any longer. It offered me a name, the woman who lived in apartment 3B, a quiet, lonely woman who always kept her curtains drawn, who never spoke to anyone whose light stayed on far. Too late, and it showed me what would happen if I delivered. Her would end the dreams, and the bleeding, and the noise. It would leave me alone. It would grant me quiet peace. And then it showed me what would happen if I refused, the building collapsing, inward teeth of copper ripping through wood, and steel, the entire block consumed, the hissing reaching out through water, mains through electrical grids, through the soil itself, infecting everything, spreading, screaming. And I saw my body in that vision, twisted open, made part of the machine my lungs turned to. Filters my eyes, replaced with gauges my spine, threaded with pipes, and I knew the only way out. The wrench appeared again, not handed to me, not laid at my feet, simply there, hovering in the air, humming gently with the weight of all the decisions made before mine. And I took it not because I wanted to, but because it was the only thing left to do. I climbed the stairs back up through the house, now twitching and breathing around me. The walls slicked, the lights strobing, the hissing, now more like a scream. And I reached 3B and knocked. And she opened the door, sleepy, confused. And I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. She didn't scream, not right away. She recognized something in my eyes. The wrench felt heavy, not with metal, but with memory. Every swing echoing down 1,000 pipes, every drop of blood quickly washed away, sucked into the floor, the ceiling, the walls, until there was nothing left. And when it was done, the building sighed like a beast fed, like a god appeased, like pressure finally released, and the lights flickered, and the hissing stopped that night. I slept in silence. And in the morning the sun rose. Normally the clocks moved forward, the faucets ran clear, and for the first time in weeks I tasted food that didn't rot in my mouth. And when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the figure behind me. I saw myself. But something was missing, something I had given away a week past. Then another people noticed she was gone, but no one searched very hard. Just a few knocks on the door, and a visit from a super who claimed she'd broken her lease and left in the night, left everything behind. No note, no warning, just absence. And the hissing didn't return, not in the pipes, but sometimes when I'm outside, when I walk past the alley that runs behind the building, I hear it faint like breath on glass, like a whisper in a storm, a hiss that follows me, waits for me. And I know the debt is paid for now, but the building is still there, and someone new just moved into apartment 3B, and the hissing has begun again.